Hi, I'm Sky, aka acloudyskye, and this is my Formfare 2021 Artist Showcase. First, I'm going to be breaking down how I made my track Heliov, and after that I'll show how I made a couple of scenes from my at-rest music video. Throughout all of this, I'll talk about inspirations and my general process for creating. I'm really excited to do this. Let's go! I do not remember this project file being purple. Alright. So the first thing I ever made for this song was actually this chord progression here. It's only used once in the entire thing to transition to the melodic drop, but I thought it sounded really nice, and for a while I couldn't really figure out what to do with it. I ended up just simplifying the chord progression into 4 or 5 chords and used those for the basis for the rest of the track. This song was super inspired by the track Tomorrow by Kevin Penkin off of the Made in Abyss OST. The intro to that track has this really cute melody that plays on, I think, a kalimba. And it's like sort of offbeat from the rest of the chords, and I wanted to do something similar. For the build-up, I ended up just stacking a bunch of different elements on top of each other. This is the sub bass. Big orchestral drums, because you have to. So I take my orchestral drums very seriously. I want to make sure when the listener hears like these big wide drums coming in, they're just like, oh, something's about to go down. This lead is just a saw wave with some of the high-end cut out and a little bit of resonance, as well as an echo filter on it. I say echo filter, I just mean the Ableton echo device. But there's also a little bit of pitch variation on the synth itself, and it gives it like this analog sci-fi sort of sound that plays on top of everything, which I think is kind of cool. Spooky background synth? Yeah! So this sound here is a double bass. I first heard this used in like a Lorne song, and it sounded really evil in that one, and I've been obsessed with it ever since, so I use it in a lot of my songs now. There's also this weird bass in the build-up that clashes with the sub, which is something you usually don't want, but in this case I thought it gave it like a bit more of a natural sound, because if you play some bass notes into like a big cathedral or something, I imagine all those reverberations are going to start clashing, so I guess this is kind of doing that. Some strings get added in as the build reaches its peak. And here's everything together. There's also a piano layer and guitar layer that I didn't feel were important to go over, but yeah. So around this point in the track is when we start transitioning into the first drop, which is a lot of the elements that have already been established but really distorted and mangled around to sound really gritty. In particular, these drums right here are the actual orchestral drums that I was using before, but without any of the echo and just with a bunch of compression and distortion on it to give it like a really aggressive snap. So some of the basses that I'm using here in this drop are actually the same basses that I used in my Cashmere Cat bootleg. I guess the fun thing about them is that they're not actually basses, they're just kind of stretched drum samples that have been pitched up and down depending on the notes, which is why you see I kind of have those duplicate track layers there, which are just different notes for the progression. An extra bit of noise that's being added to the drums here, which is actually just like a sine noise bass that I vocoded onto the drums. And after all that distortion, you gotta have the orchestral section. I added in this little melody here, which is the same melody that's playing in the next drop, just so that the listener isn't completely caught off guard when that hits. There's a lot of layers in this drop which are kind of like synth vocal pads and actual vocal pads. It's a kind of nice contrast that I like to use. This pitched up choir sound is a sound that I used a ton on Blood Rushing My Current Through a Power Line, to the point where I had to like stop myself from using it on literally every track. I think this lead here is definitely the thing that gives the drop like all of its character. It's this very plucky, weird mechanical instrument thing that I made with Ableton's Tension, which is a physical modeling synth, which is really fun to play around with because you're essentially like creating new instruments with this synth, and you can create some really cool sounds. Big drums, big drums, big drums, big drums, big drums, big drums. And here are some other various layers that are going on under the track. We got our basses, super saws. This is a kind of drier layer, and then we have something that's a bit more wet. All together now. I had no idea what to do for the outro of the track, so I just did this. That concludes the Heliov breakdown. So I first started working on this in the summer of 2020, and it took a really long time for me to finish because throughout the period where I was also working on the album, I just lost a lot of motivation at certain points, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make this turn out in a way that I was going to be happy with it. And I think something that really pushed me to finishing it was dropping that original album trailer, and some of the shots from this were in it, and I remember seeing some people saying how they thought some of this stuff in it looked really cool, and I was like, okay, I gotta focus, I gotta finally tie the bow on this project, put it out there, have some people watch it. I think it'll be good, and I'm really glad I did, because this is definitely one of the things I'm most proud of making. It's definitely not perfect. Even when watching it now, I'm like, oh, there's certain shots where maybe I could have touched up a little bit, but as far as just a project that I was doing out of passion, this is like, you know, something that I've had in mind for a while. So I made everything within Blender and rendered it out using Eevee, which is a real-time renderer that Blender has built in. And I used that because I couldn't actually use the Cycles render engine, which is the ray tracing one, because my laptop is really bad. But I thought it ended up looking alright, so yeah, it's fine. So I'm really bad at 2D animation. I just straight up do not know how it works, so I cheat a lot by using a 3D model of AMP that I trace over and then use the grease pencil to fill in some of the details. There are also a couple of shots in the music video which the environment is made out of like entirely one material, and some of the materials I made by just going outside and taking photos of rocks and making them seamless. And that ended up working out pretty well because it gave it a lot of natural detail, so I didn't have to do any weird texturing stuff. So yeah, that's basically everything that I wanted to showcase. Huge shout out to everyone at Forum, especially the Pink lads, for putting this all together. I think it's awesome that we have a cool little community for creatives to just make art. Because art is just, it's cool. It's
yeah,
like
art, come on,
let's
go,
let's
make the art.
Let's make the art.